She was the woman every camera wanted to capture, the face that defined Hollywood, the dream of millions. In the golden glow of the silver screen, she seemed entirely untouchable, a goddess crafted from light, glamour, and an effortless, intoxicating sensuality that held the entire world captive. To look at her was to look at the absolute peak of American fame, a dazzling vision of beauty and success that promised that anyone, from anywhere, could conquer the universe if they just smiled brightly enough. But behind that luminous smile, away from the blinding flashes of the paparazzi and the roaring applause of the studios, was a lonely woman trapped inside a life filled with heartbreak, dangerous relationships, crippling addiction, and a haunting mystery that still refuses to die. The public saw a glamorous superstar who possessed everything a human being could possibly desire, but very few people knew the staggering cost of maintaining that illusion. The contrast between the breathless icon on the screen and the fragile, wounded woman in the dark was a chasm that grew wider with every passing year, slowly consuming the person behind the myth. Decades after the world lost her, the questions still echo through the corridors of Hollywood history, refusing to be silenced by the passage of time. What really happened to Marilyn Monroe, and how did America's greatest dream transform into its most enduring tragedy? The truth turned out to be far more complicated and far more devastating than anyone could have imagined, rooted in a past that she could never quite outrun, no matter how famous she became. Long before she was Marilyn, she was simply Norma Jean, a child born into a world that didn't seem to have any room for her. To understand the profound loneliness that defined her private life, one must look beneath the bleach blonde hair and the velvet gowns, back to the gray, dusty streets of Los Angeles, where a little girl grew up without a stable family, constantly searching for a place to belong. Born in 1926, her childhood was a chaotic, terrifying tapestry of neglect and displacement, dominated by the shadow of her mother's severe mental illness. Gladys Pearl Baker was a woman plagued by paranoid schizophrenia, a devastating condition that frequently rendered her unable to care for herself, let alone a growing child. Norma Jean's earliest memories were fractured by her mother's sudden institutionalizations, violent outbursts, and emotional absences, leaving the young girl with a profound, terrifying sense of instability. With no father in the picture and a mother locked away in state hospitals, she was cast adrift into the cold machine of the California foster care system. She moved from one unfamiliar house to another, packed into 11 different foster homes, and spending a deeply scarring period inside the Los Angeles orphans' home. In these places, she was not a cherished daughter, but a burden, an extra mouth to feed, a temporary resident who learned very early that love was conditional, and that survival meant blending into the background. She felt desperately unwanted throughout her childhood, carrying a heavy, silent shame that told her she was inherently unlovable, a ghost passing through the lives of strangers. This agonizing rejection left a permanent, bleeding wound in her psyche, forging a lifelong, desperate fear of abandonment that would dictate every relationship she ever entered as an adult. When she was just 16 years old, facing the terrifying prospect of being sent to yet another orphanage when her foster family moved away, she chose the only escape available to a young girl in 1942. She married a 21-year-old neighbor named James Doherty, a union born not out of grand romance, but out of a desperate, panicked need to find a safe harbor and avoid returning to the institutional coldness of the orphanage. It was a marriage of convenience that provided a roof over her head, but it could never fill the vast, empty void inside her soul, a void that was about to be noticed by a world hungry for something extraordinary. But that was only the beginning of a transformation that would stun the world and rewrite the rules of modern celebrity. The quiet, brown-haired girl working in a wartime defense factory, spraying fuselage components and packing parachutes, was discovered by a military photographer who saw an undeniable, radiant spark through his lens. What followed was one of the most meticulously crafted metamorphoses in cultural history, a deliberate, grueling process where Norma Jean was systematically dismantled and rebuilt into Marilyn Monroe. She dyed her hair a striking platinum blonde, took speech lessons to lower her voice into that signature, breathless whisper, practiced her walk until it became a hypnotic art form, and changed her name to something that rolled off the tongue like music. As the 1950s dawned, she exploded onto the Hollywood scene, transforming almost overnight into the biggest star the industry had ever seen, a cinematic force of nature who could single-handedly guarantee a film's success. Yet, as the marquee lights grew brighter, the pressure of becoming America's ultimate sex symbol began to take a heavy, suffocating toll. The public demanded perfection, demanding that she be the hypersexualized, perpetually happy, ditzy blonde they saw on the screen, a cartoonish fantasy designed for mass consumption. Marilyn found herself completely imprisoned by her own creation, forced to perform 24 hours a day for a culture that loved the image but didn't care about the actual human being underneath it. The contrast between her public image and her private reality was staggering. While millions of men fantasized about her and millions of women imitated her, the real woman spent her evenings alone in quiet hotel rooms, desperately reading psychology books, trying to understand why the immense adoration of the entire world couldn't make her feel secure for even a single moment. She had achieved everything she thought she wanted, but the fame only magnified her isolation, making her realize that people were in love with Marilyn Monroe, a fictional character, while Norma Jean remained completely invisible, shivering in the dark. This exhausting duality infected her personal life, turning her romantic relationships into high-stakes battlegrounds where her need for unconditional love clashed violently with the realities of her fame. Her second marriage, to baseball legend Joe DiMaggio in 1954, was a spectacular collision of two great American myths, a passionate romance that captured the imagination of the public but was doomed from the very start by the irreconcilable differences between their worlds. DiMaggio, a fiercely private, traditional man of Italian heritage, wanted a quiet, devoted housewife who would step out of the spotlight and belong solely to him. He was deeply, obsessively in love with the woman, but he utterly despised the celebrity culture that surrounded her, growing consumed by an intense, suffocating jealousy every time she stepped in front of a camera. Their brief marriage was defined by explosive, volatile conflicts reported by historians and biographers, fueled by the staggering disparity in their expectations. The breaking point arrived during the filming of the iconic subway grate scene for The 7-Year Itch in New York City, where thousands of cheering onlookers watched Marilyn's white dress billow up around her. DiMaggio, watching from the crowd, was deeply mortified and enraged by what he viewed as a cheap exhibition of his wife to the world, leading to a legendary, furious confrontation in their hotel room that night. Their divorce followed just months later, a painful admission that passion alone could not bridge the gap between her ambition and his desire for control. Yet, despite the bitter end of their marriage, DiMaggio's devotion to her never truly extinguished. He remained a protective, albeit distant, guardian in her life, the one man who didn't want to exploit her for profit, and the man who would ultimately carry a quiet, unbroken sorrow for her long after the rest of Hollywood had moved on to the next sensation. Seeking a completely different kind of salvation, Marilyn turned her gaze toward the intellectual elite, embarking on a romance that she hoped would finally validate her mind and rescue her from the blonde stereotype. In 1956, she married the brilliant Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Arthur Miller, entering a union that the media cynically dubbed the marriage of the egghead and the hourglass. Marilyn was utterly captivated by Miller's intellect, viewing him as a mentor, a protector, and a father figure who could introduce her to a world of serious literature, politics, and respectability. She wanted desperately to be seen as an artist, and for a time, Miller provided the emotional and intellectual grounding she so desperately craved, standing by her side even as he was targeted by the anti-communist witch hunts of the era. But the illusion of safety was shattered during their honeymoon in England when Marilyn accidentally discovered Miller's private journal entries left open on a desk. According to several biographers, she read words that pierced her straight through the heart. Miller had written that he was disappointed in her, that he felt her emotional instability was threatening his work, and that he sometimes felt ashamed of her in front of his intellectual peers. The emotional pain of this discovery was catastrophic, instantly decimating what little self-confidence she had spent years trying to build. The realization that even the man she viewed as her intellectual savior secretly looked down upon her and viewed her as a burden triggered her deepest childhood traumas of abandonment and inadequacy. The marriage slowly decayed over the next few years, culminating in their divorce in 1961, leaving Marilyn more emotionally adrift and cynical than ever before, convinced that no one would ever truly accept her for who she actually was. What the public consistently failed to see, blinded by the manufactured image of the sensual comic actress, was Marilyn's hidden intelligence and her fierce, independent spirit. She was a woman who completely broke the stereotype of the dumb blonde, possessing a sharp, curious mind and a deep, lifelong love of literature. Her personal library contained hundreds of books, spanning complex works by Dostoevsky, Whitman, Joyce, Freud, and countless treatises on philosophy, psychology, and poetry. She was a voracious reader who sought refuge in the minds of history's greatest thinkers, using books as a shield against the superficiality of the town that had claimed her. She traveled to New York to study under Lee Strasberg at the legendary Actors Studio, enduring grueling psychological work to refine her craft, determined to be a serious, dramatic actress rather than a studio prop. When 20th Century Fox refused to give her better roles or fair pay, she did something completely unprecedented for an actress in the 1950s. She walked out on her contract, moved across the country, and formed her own independent production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions. She fought the powerful, tyrannical Hollywood studio heads for creative control, equal treatment, and the right to choose her own directors and scripts, effectively becoming a pioneer for women's rights in the entertainment industry. She won that battle, forcing the studios to bend to her terms, a stunning victory that proved she was a shrewd, courageous businesswoman who understood her own immense cultural value. Yet, no matter how many battles she won against the executives, the war raging within her own mind was one she could never seem to control, a silent, creeping chaos that was slowly undermining her life. Beneath the triumphant headlines, her private world was a turbulent vortex of inner chaos, fueled by chronic anxiety, crippling depression, and a severe, agonizing insomnia that left her awake for days at a time, staring at the ceiling of her lonely bedrooms. To cope with the relentless terrors of her mind and the overwhelming pressure of her career, she became increasingly dependent on a toxic cocktail of prescription medications, including heavy barbiturates and sleeping pills, frequently washed down with alcohol. Her fear of abandonment grew into a paralyzing monster, making her emotionally unstable and highly unpredictable. This internal turmoil manifested heavily on film sets, where she became notorious for her frequent lateness, sometimes keeping hundreds of cast and crew members waiting for 6 or 7 hours because she was trapped in her dressing room, paralyzed by stage fright and a profound fear of failure. She engaged in fierce conflicts with studio executives who grew increasingly frustrated by her erratic behavior and the soaring costs of her productions, pushing her further into isolation. Her private life became a subject of endless, salacious media scrutiny, saturated with rumored affairs with various co-stars, directors, and high-profile figures. While many of these rumors were born from the desperate imaginations of gossip columnists, the constant speculation only added to the suffocating sense that she was public property, a woman whose every private moment was dissected for the entertainment of the masses, leaving her with nowhere to hide. As the 1960s began, Marilyn's search for meaning and protection led her away from Hollywood and into the dangerous, high-stakes arena of national politics. This transition culminated in one of the most iconic, unforgettable moments in American cultural history: her performance at President John F. Kennedy's 45th birthday celebration at Madison Square Garden in May 1962. Stepping onto the stage in front of 15,000 people, she shed her white fur coat to reveal a dress that seemed made of nothing but diamonds and air, a flesh-colored, skin-tight gown adorned with thousands of shimmering crystals. When she began to sing, her voice was an incredibly intimate, breathless purr that felt less like a public performance and more like a private, seductive confession directed entirely at the commander-in-chief. The atmosphere in the arena was electric, thick with a collective gasp from the audience, and the public reaction was an immediate sensational explosion of gossip and fascination. This singular, provocative performance intensified long-standing, whispered rumors regarding Marilyn's alleged romantic involvements with powerful political figures, most notably President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. According to several biographers and historians who have studied the era, Marilyn had entered a fragile, highly volatile social circle, where the boundaries between Hollywood glamour and Washington power were dangerously blurred. Some historians believe that she viewed these powerful men as ultimate protectors who could elevate her above the tawdry world of cinema, while others suggest she was merely a temporary distraction in a ruthless world of political calculation. These rumors, though never conclusively verified with definitive documentary proof, created an undercurrent of immense danger around her, as a vulnerable, emotionally unstable actress became entangled in the private lives of the most powerful and heavily monitored men on the planet, an entanglement that many believe placed her directly in the crosshairs of forces far larger and more ruthless than anything she had ever encountered in Hollywood. The public saw a glamorous superstar flirting with history, but behind closed doors, the reality was a terrifying downward spiral into darkness. By the summer of 1962, Marilyn's emotional condition had reached a critical, alarming state. She was fired from her final, uncompleted film, Something's Got to Give, by executives who had finally run out of patience with her constant absences and erratic health crises. Her professional struggles left her feeling deeply rejected and terrified that her career, the only thing that had ever given her a sense of identity, was completely slipping through her fingers. Her final days were a blurred, frantic sequence of phone calls to therapists, friends, and former lovers, a desperate cry for help from a woman who felt utterly marooned in her newly purchased home in Brentwood, Los Angeles. Then came the fateful night of August 4th, 1962, a night that began with quiet domesticity and ended in a tragedy that would shock the world and ignite a mystery lasting for generations. The timeline of those final hours remains fractured and heavily contested. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, claimed to have noticed a light shining under Marilyn's bedroom door in the early hours of August 5th, finding the door locked and receiving no response to her calls. Panicked, she contacted Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, who arrived at the house, broke through the bedroom window and discovered the devastating scene. Marilyn Monroe was dead, lying naked in her bed, her hand clutching the telephone receiver, surrounded by empty prescription pill bottles. But the moment the news broke, the official narrative began to fracture under the weight of unusual details and glaring inconsistencies that have fueled decades of fierce debate. Questions immediately arose regarding the handling of the crime scene, with several witnesses suggesting that there was a mysterious, unexplained delay of several hours between the initial discovery of the body and the arrival of the Los Angeles Police Department. Key records, including telephone logs from Marilyn's house for that fateful night, reportedly vanished from investigators' hands, leading to persistent historical controversy over whether a deliberate cleanup operation had occurred before the authorities were notified. To this day, three major explanations stand at the center of this modern American myth, each offering a completely different lens through which to view her final hours. The first theory, and the one officially concluded by the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, is that of an accidental overdose or a probable suicide. This conclusion is heavily supported by the undeniable reality of her fragile mental health in the months leading up to her death. Marilyn had a well-documented history of severe depression, multiple previous overdoses that required emergency medical intervention, and a dangerous tolerance for lethal prescription medications. The toxicological analysis of her blood revealed massive, fatal concentrations of chloral hydrate and nembutal, amounts that far exceeded a normal therapeutic dose and indicated the ingestion of a vast number of pills. Proponents of this theory argue that she was a deeply unhappy woman who, in a moment of profound, alcohol-induced loneliness and despair, simply took too many pills to quiet the noise in her head, or deliberately chose to end her agonizing pain once and for all, leaving the world before youth and beauty could fade. However, the perceived gaps in the official investigation quickly birthed a second, far more sinister explanation, a theory of political conspiracy and state-sanctioned murder. This hypothesis, which has captivated conspiracy theorists for over half a century, suggests that Marilyn was silenced by powerful entities within the American government or the intelligence agencies to prevent her from revealing damaging, highly sensitive secrets she had allegedly learned during her rumored relationships with John and Robert Kennedy. Some long-standing conspiracy theories claim that Robert Kennedy was spotted in Los Angeles on the day of her death, and that her personal diary, which supposedly contained compromising political information, was stolen from her home immediately after she died. While these stories have become deeply embedded in pop culture, mainstream historians remain deeply divided, and it must be stated clearly that no conclusive, verifiable evidence has ever been produced to prove these claims, leaving them as compelling, dark folktales of the Cold War era. The third major explanation avoids the malice of murder and the intent of suicide, focusing instead on a tragic hypothesis of medical error and accidental cross-medication. This theory, championed by several independent researchers and biographers, suggests that Marilyn's death was the result of a catastrophic, unintended interaction between different drugs prescribed by her separate physicians, who may not have been fully communicating with one another. According to this view, a lethal dose of barbiturates may have been accidentally administered or absorbed in a way that proved fatal because her system was already heavily compromised by other sedatives. Proponents argue that this explains the lack of a suicide note and the fact that she was reaching for the phone when she died, suggesting she realized too late that something was terribly wrong and was trying to call for help. Yet, like all the other theories, this remains a subject of intense, unresolved debate. A puzzle with missing pieces that ensures the truth of her final night remains forever locked in the shadows of the past. But perhaps the greatest mystery was never how Marilyn Monroe died, but whether the world ever truly understood who she was during her short, turbulent time on Earth. More than 60 years after her tragic departure, she remains far more than Hollywood's greatest icon. She has transcended cinema to become a permanent, haunting symbol of American ambition, deep-seated loneliness, resilient survival, and the devastating price of absolute fame. She was a modern pioneer who fought a corrupt, patriarchal studio system for her own dignity and independence, a brilliant mind that refused to be limited by the narrow imagination of her era, and a fragile soul that wanted nothing more than to be loved for who she truly was, rather than the myth she had created. Her voice has faded into history. Her films have become timeless, preserved classics of a lost golden age, and the enduring mystery surrounding her final night continues to captivate and haunt new generations of viewers across the globe. She remains a mirror for our own culture, reflecting our obsession with youth, beauty, and the tragic destruction of the things we love the most. Ultimately, the story of Marilyn Monroe is not just a story of a Hollywood scandal, but a profound human tragedy about a little girl named Norma Jean who built a goddess to conquer the world, only to watch that goddess consume her entirely, leaving behind an eternal, glittering phantom that the world will never forget.